Hey, greetings and blessings, everybody. My name is Seth. You're listening to Radical Health, and thank you for being here. Today's episode is with a friend of mine, Ela Harrison. I met her in the International Fruit Festival community. She's very passionate about natural food, which is why I was drawn to her mind and drawn to having a conversation with her to share with everybody. Because I think she's got a lot of insight as far as natural food, how to enjoy it, and how to access it wherever you are in the world. So that's part of this conversation is how to find the Garden of Eden wherever you are. I grew up in the northeast of the United States of America, and I've lived the last 8 years or so in the southeast. Ela spent a lot of time in the extreme northwest in Alaska and the extreme southwest in both Hawaii and California, I believe. She's also lived other places in the world, overseas in England and Israel. And we talk about the fresh food that we find in all these places. We talk about a lot of this stuff through the lens of raw veganism, eating plants in their whole natural state for best health. But we also challenge a lot of the dogma that comes with that. You'll hear Ela recounts her story of, being almost 10 years raw vegan and then becoming a little disillusioned with it and experimenting with other modes, other products, so to speak, other foods, and, living experimentally and not holding on so hard to a set of beliefs, but actually trying new things. So she really represents that. I think at this time of the show being recorded and published, she's been recommitted to raw veganism, is feeling great. And we just have an open and honest conversation about how to enjoy natural foods. So big shout out to Ela. Thank you for being on the show. Thanks all for being here. We're going to get into the conversation, how to find the Garden of Eden wherever you are. Ela, welcome to Radical Health. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we've been talking a bit, and I was impressed by the way you were talking about fruits, different varieties and species, but not just that, but your relationship to food in a pretty zoomed out way. I thought it was mature and based on a lot of experience. So I just want to have a conversation today about natural foods with someone who's as enthusiastic as me about natural food. So let's just kick it off. What have you been enjoying recently? What are some of the foods you've been nourishing yourself with recently?
Well, that's a lovely question. And this time of year, well, I was just saying before we started that it's just becoming springtime. Traditionally, I think of that as the time of year when there's the least fruit available. Um, and that it surprised me when I first started getting into this that continues just like the early part of the day is the coldest part because it has the cold of the night behind it, versus the evening, which is warmer because it has the warmth of the day. Similarly, the autumn, the fall, is warmer than the spring. And when I started to pay attention to this, it surprised me how cold it still is in, the northern hemisphere, even in May, June. How little fruit there is. Maybe you start to get strawberries, apricots, but so this is when I've been grateful for what comes to us from warmer climates, with the blessing, with gratitude for that. I have had the most ecstatically delicious melons in the past couple of weeks. One was you call it a golden dew, or a canary. Over here, it's called a honeydew, just to be confusing. But it's the canary melon, and it was just perfectly juicy, sweet, delicious, and also a peel de sapo, Santa Claus melon. I think they both came from Brazil, so disculpa, but just so nourishing for me. And we talked in a different conversation. I learned recently, I think I've cracked it finally, something I'd been wishing I could do my whole life, which is enjoy cucumbers. Same family as melons, so why not? And lately, yes, I've been enjoying cucumbers, either just eating them like a stick or grating them and making that the base for a salad, the grated cucumber, or a dip.
Beautiful. I got a quick question about that. When you grate your cucumbers, I notice a lot of water comes out. Do you try to squeeze that water out and drink that, or put it aside, or do you not think about that much?
I think about that a lot, and I have a few things I want to say about that, but the answer is all of the above. Sometimes I just drink the lovely cucumber juice that comes out of the grating. The first time I did this, I mashed an avocado or part of an avocado into the grated cucumber. And then the avocado soaks up that extra liquid and it becomes more of a discrete, sort of almost a pate type basis for a salad or to wrap in a lettuce leaf or if you want to do that. Um, but this is this is something kind of at the core of my explorations with fruit, actually. We start with the grater, but I would go even to the knife. And I've done quite a lot of raw chefing and actually non-raw chefing too over the years. And it's an art and it's a delight and it's creativity. It's such a lovely expression of the beauty of the food and also of love for the people who are going to eat it. But also my whole life, I've had a side of me that sees, my goodness, you cut up the melon, never mind grate it, you cut it up. Look how much juice gets wasted. If I'm slicing the cucumber or the mango, I'm losing juice if I'm not sort of, making extraordinary efforts to catch it somehow. And if I just bite it with my teeth, then all the juice is going into my mouth. And so it's this dichotomy between loving the creativity and the artistry on the one hand, and feeling like it's more true to the fruit just to eat it and to do as minimal cutting as I can.
I totally agree and feel you on that, because especially when I cut up tomatoes, there's always a pile of juice left on the cutting board, and I have to
Yeah,
sloppily get it on the knife and get it into my bowl or into my mouth or
I
something.
know.
Whereas if you just take bites of the tomatoes, you don't lose anything. So that's a really good point. What role do
You have to be
utensils
careful
play?
though with the tomatoes. Yeah, I mean, cherry tomatoes, I think it's happened a few times to me in recent weeks. You bite it wrong and squirts, and then you're picking tomato seeds off your kitchen.
Yes, yes. But that is one of the best problems you could have, I think, in life is tomato juice.
Oh, yeah.
Um, yeah, no, that's a great point with the tools, because grading and cutting, they are steps of processing. When people say, I don't eat processed food, or when they talk about processed food, a lot of times there's not enough nuance, because a sliced apple, in my opinion, is processed. Now, it's not terribly processed, it's only one step, but when you slice it, some of the cell walls get exposed to oxygen, the oxidation starts, the vitamin content begins to lower. And so it's just something we got to think about. Talk more about just the balance between preparation, tools, minimal processing, and then on the other hand, the primal way of eating with your hands, maybe even under the tree from which the fruit came.
Yes.
Like,
Uh-huh.
how do you balance those in life?
It's such an interesting question, and we haven't even talked about blenders or juicers, have we? We're talking about just knives and graters.
Those rip up the cells even more.
Absolutely. And I went for years with no Vitamix. And at some point, I think it was 2010, I said, I can afford a Vitamix. I'd killed enough, crappy blenders. Um, and at that time, I was having a lot more blended foods for various reasons. And I really loved the Vitamix. But it's funny, the same thing happened when I got a dehydrator some years later. I used it almost exclusively to make things for other people. The dehydrator, it was almost 100%. The blender, the Vitamix, I did, I did, I did a lot of smoothies for myself, but anything more fancy was not really going to be for me. Um, and it's interesting because um, about, I guess it's 10 months ago that I really kind of recommitted myself to being raw, as opposed to being kind of raw by default most of the time, but it wasn't my thing because of stuff that happened back in 2008, I guess. Um, in Hawaii, but I got a vacuum blender, and initially I was doing quite a lot of green smoothies, um, which traditionally I thought helped my digestion. And sidebar too, another reason I got into smoothies a lot earlier in the day when I had sort of less good blenders was because I preferred to have fruit, but I was sort of influenced that I should have greens as well. And I really wanted to have wild greens and sort of greens that people wouldn't think of eating, that I couldn't stomach raw. So I kind of invented a green smoothie because of that. And funnily, kind of about a couple of months later, met Victoria Butenko and asked, "How are you doing?" And she said, "Oh, she just invented the green smoothie and she was just writing a book about it." I'm like, well, I kind of did that too. But so back then, it was to use produce that I couldn't eat straight. I couldn't just eat a chard leaf. I really couldn't, and I did try. So that hence the green smoothie. So laterally, like a year ago, when I got the decent blender, it was um, okay, green smoothies again, and I realized I didn't want to be eating those greens, and they gave me a stomachache more so. So it's a bit embarrassing. Like I got a very good price for it, but I've barely used that blender. My mom has a friend who comes and stays sometimes who's doing the Brooke Goldner diet with the green smoothies with the flax seeds, um, which has really, really helped her to heal a health condition. So she's religious about doing these green smoothies. So she is just delighted to have that blender because she doesn't bring her Vitamix with her, and she's yeah. So she's really benefiting from it. But I've since between the last two times she came here, I don't think I even plugged it in. Um,
Wait, so you said that your stomach doesn't agree with some of the greens like chard, even when blended, even when those cells are totally ripped open.
mhm.
That's what you experienced?
That's what I've experienced, and I would say that maybe I've become less tolerant of like gut discomfort um, than I used to be. I think I used to put up with quite a lot of um, gut discomfort. Like I would make all kinds of things that were delicious with raw cauliflower, um, and yeah, I wouldn't do that to myself now. If I really really want to have cauliflower, it's going to be cooked. I'm sorry.
I hear you. I had some cooked cauliflower last night and it was delicious and soft and flavorful and
It is delicious. Yeah.
yeah. Now, so what was going on in your life that made you or was there a point at which you shifted from eating maybe culturally traditional food to more raw plants and why was that?
There are quite a few different ways I could answer that because fruit has been important in my life my whole life for a variety of reasons. And there was also a very definite time in 2002 when I found out about raw vegan diet as a thing and said, that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm doing from now on. So, so, so I'm half Israeli. Most of my family's in Israel, and my family's originally from Iraq. So that and in the Middle East, in that part of the world, fruits and vegetables are a huge, huge part of the diet. So and it's just normal. My cousins and uncles would go into my grandmother's house. There would always be large bowls of fruit, and they would just sit there and eat the whole bowl full. Just you know, if guests come, you don't put out cakes, you put out dried fruit and nuts. And all the meals. Yes, there's meat or there's dairy, but not at the same meal because of kosher laws. But there's also just huge plethoras of vegetables with the meal. And the dessert is going to be fruit. Sometimes there's a sort of low key cake, but the dessert is fruit, just by standard. So I had decided by age 7, not having eaten meat very many times at all, that I was vegetarian. I was not going to eat meat. Um, Dairy I didn't agree with or didn't agree with me, and eggs I didn't agree with or like. So I was kind of without any intention, I would say I was mostly vegan. I mean, if there was ice cream, I'd have eaten it. You know, I wasn't as a 7 or 8 year old being intentional about no, I'm vegan. It was oh that's dairy, I won't eat it. My mom could get me to eat fruit yogurts or ice cream or whatever. But um, yes, I was kind of very heavily towards the fruit. The fruit was what I preferred to eat. And to some extent the vegetables. There are a lot of vegetables that don't agree with me though. Like bell peppers make me super sick. And I didn't like cucumbers until recently. Um, I didn't like avocados till one aunt basically made me like them. um, so it was really fruit that was what I went for. Um, and I have celiac, so I had a lot of gut problems, and just and also needed to be really cautious about what cooked food I ate, if it had flour in it or whatever. So fruit was often I'm. It's sort of embarrassing actually to say this, but for a lot of my growing up, the safe to eat foods were fruit and potato chips until I was about 17 or 18, and suddenly they started putting gluten into potato chips sometimes, but that used to be something I didn't need to read the label on. But potato chips are obviously horrible for you, but even in the UK where the fruit wasn't good, and then all the time I was in Israel when I was a child, fruit was where I was going to. Also, and this is a really strange comment maybe, but as well as the sort of, I had somewhat of a Jewish strand in my upbringing, but more so, both of my parents, until I was about 11 or 12, were involved in a philosophical organization. And I went to a small school that was run by that organization for most. I went to a specialist music school eventually, but most of my schooling I went there. And it it wasn't great in a lot of ways, but there were some interesting things. And the lunch that they served at the school for most of the years that I was there didn't involve any hot food. It involved fruit, like there'd be bowls of fruit and salady ingredients, nuts, honey, bread, cheese, um, and that was kind of about it. And it was proverbial that children from this school would go home absolutely starving hungry too. But for most people, that meant they had bread and cheese for lunch. I don't eat bread and cheese, so I had fruit. But everyone, regardless of what food they liked, everyone had to begin the meal with a piece of fruit. And it was a philosophical thing. It was some saying, which, people like to disagree with, that you should start by cleansing what's within. And that's what we were told as, 5-year-olds. Um, so that, I mean, this was entirely in a context that most people, and probably myself included, are going to rebel against. But it was, for me, it was also an additional input in favor of fruit. Um, I was also quite young when I started to gather fruit. I would be looking for, in the UK, it was strawberries and blackberries. In Israel, there were a lot of wild loquat trees, and I didn't even know the English name for it, only the Hebrew name, till I went to California, because we didn't have them in the UK when I was a kid. Now there are loquat trees out just around, and some of them even fruit. But yeah, loquats, and and I would also identify which herbs were aromatic and make herbal teas out of them. By the time I was 3 or 4 years old, I was interested in that. So it was kind of, I guess it was in the philosophical environment around me, and it was in what I was naturally attracted to, and it was, in a sense, a default mode in terms of what food was not harmful to me because of the allergies that I had. Um, and then, I mean, I was volitionally vegan in 2002 when I decided that I was going to become a raw foodist. It was through the midwifery of the internet, as so many things are. And the funny thing is that I I was so into making everything from scratch that I could, and I had been eating some tofu, and I decided, if I'm going to eat this, I have to know how to make it. So I was searching on the internet, and at that point, search engines, there was Google, but it wasn't great. It took me to all kinds of strange places. And I found a page where it said, well, I'll tell you why you shouldn't eat tofu. And I was like, oh, what's this? And so I went and read, and it was one of the it was one of the original raw food support websites. So I was like, yeah, that's great. I'm not going to eat tofu. Yeah, I can just eat fruit and some veg. Fantastic.
I find it interesting, and I think it's really important that we learn how to make the foods that we like to eat, because then you know what goes into it. And that's something I've always practiced as well. Oh, I like, this was what, 15 years ago. eggplant parm. Let me figure out how to make that. Oh, you got to bread it. You got to use egg. You got to, and then so you know exactly what goes into it. You know the steps required. Even I went as far as, hey, if I'm going to be eating chicken, I want to know how to kill it and how to butcher it and how to
Oh, me too.
feather it.
Yeah.
And I did that, and it was very revealing. It taught me a lot about what goes into that process, that I don't like that process, that it's messy, it's smelly, it's scary, it's emotionally taxing. And I think that's really important. People can practice that. If you like potato chips, just see what goes into making it. See what kind of fried oil you got to deal with,
Yeah. Make
you
some
know?
and see what a mess you end up with in the kitchen afterwards too. I've done that too, though, in terms of killing the animals. I kind of did it in reverse because having been basically vegan vegetarian my whole life, in Hawaii, I got sort of persuaded into the animal products issue. And I said, if I'm going to eat animal products, I have to be involved. So I got into milking goats and cows and looking after chickens. And even I didn't actually do the killing, but participate in butchering. And then after that, lived in Alaska and participated in hunting and fishing. And it was I felt and in a huge amount of the time in Hawaii, I was working with bees as well because I did discover in Hawaii before this whole thing with the animal products happened that the local honey actually seemed to help with my digestion. Like I could eat an avocado if I had honey with it, but not if I didn't, for example. So I was hugely involved in beekeeping, but it's so it was very strange to do it in reverse, but to do it with the spirit of reverence and of feeling this spiritual connection to the animal, of the life cycle idea that we are all part of each other, and that even that there's a sort of ennoblement that can happen if you are going to bless this flesh and incorporate literally means to put it in your body
Mm,
yourself. Um, and it wasn't for me. It didn't last very long. I don't think it lasted even a year before I was vegan again. Um, and more recently, I had a period of time when I felt like I was called or sent to consume dairy only, sort of like the Indian sattvic diet, which involves dairy and fruit and not vegetables, because they are the only foods that are freely given. Um, and that kind of sort of hit me, and I stayed with it for a few years, but it wasn't good for me overall. But I know I mean, talking about animal products probably may not be what people want to hear about, but for me, as someone who was completely naive to animal products, I didn't know anything about them. And then I learned to prepare them for loved ones, and then had this fairly brief period where not only I consumed them a little bit, but also was involved in harvesting that food, acquiring that food source. Um, I think it's given me more perspective um, on how that can be and how it can be respectful, but also on how really appalling it is for the most part for most people.
mm-hmm.
So that's interesting that you were drawn to do the same. You felt you had to experience that, and you came to it from eating meat, right? Didn't you?
Yeah, I was a lifelong meat eater for over 30 years. And there was the 1 year in there I went vegetarian. I went pescatarian. I was sort of dabbling. And the more I learned and the more I was engaged in local production of meat, because that was my thing. I said, oh, I think if you get it, sustainably, regeneratively, local from a farm that these animals were happy their whole life, that was justified in my mind. And then just getting the hands dirty, it didn't feel good to contribute to that sort of process. And I like how you let your life experiences lead your decision making, because you didn't just stick with being vegan your whole life. You're feeling called this way, pulled this way to experiment, to try, to get your hands dirty. And I find that really interesting, and probably a really good thing to do is to let your life experiences lead your decision making. Because I want to go back to foraging for a second. You said even as a child you were finding strawberries and other berries around London or England, and loquats in Israel, and do you think that shaped a lot of your perspective, pulling the fruit when it's ripe straight from the tree and seeing how natural of a process that is? Like, how did foraging shape your thought processes like after that point?
I feel like foraging is so central and intrinsic to, you know, and I have so many things I want to sort of hold in my head about what you said right before that too. So I'll see if I can remember them. But foraging, we are ultimately figures on a landscape, whether we're in a city or not. And I feel like when I go to the supermarket, or even if I'm just going for a walk, I'm potentially foraging. My eyes are open. I spot now. I know where the plum trees are. They've blossomed out now. I know which Turkish greengrocers, so produce markets sort of on the street, which ones have the best grapes, and which ones had bizarrely kumquats. And um, yes, I mean, when I'm driving anywhere, I've got my eyes out for if there are fruit trees. And I think that it's a trait probably that all human beings have naturally, and it can be co-opted by shiny objects, whether that's colorful fake food or even metaphorically. So yes, I love the idea of foraging because it's organic and it's immediate and it's a little bit opportunistic, although it does also involve having a map in your head and remembering where things are so you can revisit them later in the season. Um, but it's also, so it's got this sort of intelligence to it, this spatial intelligence to it. Um, and it sort of almost in itself has a gratitude element that you're glad that it's there as well.
Yeah, it's very experiential, and just I think even the nerves on our fingertips inform us when we touch the fruit, and the softness and the fuzziness and the electricity coming off of it. That actually gives us information more than we might think. It's so tactile and so direct.
Yeah.
And then what were some of the other things you were trying to hold on to? We were talking about getting your hands dirty with animal production, and also letting
Yeah.
yourself adapt to different
It's about letting
inspirations.
yourself, yes, because I feel like it's very good to have an aim and to be willing to let it be diverted by what life brings. I think what I'm trying to say, um, probably the raw food journey, mine and other people's, epitomizes this, that there is some sort of an interaction between I create my own reality, and something that is true for me may not be true for you, on the one hand. And on the other hand, there are certain things that are inexorably true, the case, reality. And these are holding these two propositions together in tension. It's just the lifelong challenge. And I'm like a rabbit. Like I can see almost around the back of my head, literally, like very, very much, so much peripheral vision that I can get overwhelmed. And I have it metaphorically as well. It's I could get teased or bullied very easily as a child because I could always see other people's point of view. So I could be bullied. I could be made to hold an opinion and then be kind of, and then in the next breath say I believe the opposite and get mocked for it. But I can totally see the other point of view so much. Um, and if I regret the non-vegan, the animal husbandry phase, it's because I didn't really need to do that in order to be able to respect or to understand that for this person on their path, that was the right thing for them. Um, and so, but I I think the thing that's been hardest for me because of being able to take on other people's perspectives is sometimes not pulling out soon enough when something wasn't going well. Um, and I think with the situation in Hawaii that took me into animal products, it wasn't that I was kind of just thought, oh, I'll try that. It was actually quite a violent set of events that pushed me into it. And the farm that I was living on and the people around me were not supportive of raw veganism at all. Um, and I think that sometimes when your environment suggests things in a certain way, you can get kind of taken along with it. Like, so say now, bizarrely, supposing I got a craving and I thought I was craving fish. Why would I don't know, supposing. And then say my phone app shows me an advert about salmon. And then later in the day, my neighbor's cooking fish. And if that kept happening, maybe I would start thinking the universe is telling me something. So, and in Hawaii, it was kind of like that. I mean, I was surrounded by people sort of bashing vegans. I mean, the number of ex-raw vegans in that community, not just on that farm, but in the wider community, was mind-blowing. Like ex-raw vegans, and the one actual no, there were a few, but one of the few actual raw vegans, apart from myself, who was in the neighborhood, was someone I kind of knew previously, and he seemed very unhealthy and wasn't particularly nice to be around. So that was sort of a bad vibe. Um, but it ended up that I was the only person on the farm who could ever find eggs that the chickens laid. The only person who's not interested in them. And everywhere I went, I would find an egg. Nobody else could find them. I had a chicken literally laying an egg in my bed while I was in there sometimes. Not always. There would always be an egg in my bed, but sometimes she would be in there when I was in my bed. Um, and eventually I'm dreaming about eggs. So, I mean, I then broke my arm and got a infection at the same time. Um, and people said, "Oh, you can't eat fruit anymore." And I was like, "Why not?" And I discovered that actually, if I did eat fruit, I could feel it in the staph sores. So that was quite scary. So I kind of ate nothing for about a week, and that wasn't going to be sustainable. So I ended up kind of doing um, greens and carrot juice and eggs, like one or two eggs a day. And that, I mean, that kind of opened the door to then be persuaded a bit later to try some other things, which didn't stick quite so much. But that whole, I mean, especially the breaking the arm and, the having the accident, which I had a premonition about and should have avoided. Um, and then having the infection as well, which was which is a lot for the body to cope with. It felt like the culmination of this sort of, there's a little thing here and a little thing there, and if other people's perspectives around you are so strong, it makes something out of it. And a few of my friends back in California had said quite some time before this, it sounds like it's not so great for you over there. Why don't you come back? Um, and I think this sort of stubbornness of, I want to see where this is going and I feel committed to being here. I've stayed in a relationship for too long doing that in the past. And I think in this case, I might never have stopped the raw vegan thing. I might not have got to that point of having to have an accident. And, so it was sort of a violence and a strange thing. And that very farm is now owned by 80-10-10 raw vegans.
Wow, that's an interesting story for sure. Um, Now, I'm curious, when you had eggs, do you remember how you felt in your body? Did they agree with your stomach? Did they feel like they were clogging or constipating? Because a lot of people look at eggs as a animal food that is not as violent. Now, chickens don't usually want to readily give up their eggs, but you don't have to necessarily kill a chicken to get them. So it's almost like a gray area for a lot of eaters out there.
It is,
And I'm
yeah. It's
just
like a
curious.
seed.
Well, I'm curious the physical, maybe not repercussion, but the physical effect that it had on you, if you remember.
Oh, I remember very well because I was having them raw. And
Oh,
so going back to our conversation about processing food, the first time I had it, and for the first little while I had the broken arm, um, I was having it. I was blending the egg with carrot juice, ginger juice, and quite a bit of honey, and it still had the egg aftertaste. It was still kind of disgusting, but it was kind of just about palatable.
Hmm.
Um, and I actually, when I got used to it, I kind of liked it. But as soon as I could, I would just crack the egg at both ends and, you know, drink it out of the shell. Again, my minimal processing thing. Well, as soon as I could actually cope with that. And I did that for a long, probably a year. And it was actually quite amazing. It did have a good effect on me. Um, I I built some muscle, which I had not been able to build, and I felt, you know how the egg white is sort of slimy and thick. I almost felt like I was coated in. I felt less emotionally vulnerable.
Hmm.
Like, that there were some people who were sort of just habitually rude or abusive there, and I, it didn't get to me. I felt kind of a little bit protected from that. Um, but this isn't to say that I had an egg deficiency. You know, I don't think now, oh, um, I had an egg deficiency and it's because I didn't eat animal products. I think probably my raw diet wasn't very balanced at the time, especially,
Hmm.
drinking basically rainwater. So, another source of minerals that's not being gotten. So
Hmm. Now, did you ever consume cooked eggs at that time?
not then, but later, like when I was in Alaska, and I was just kind of okay. I'm not going to be a raw fooder anymore because I was still 100% raw with the eggs for a long time. And at some point, in a relationship with someone that I went to Alaska with, the first thing I had cooked actually was broccoli, and it was like having been 100% raw for almost 10 years at that point, and associating broccoli subliminally with a tummy ache, and then having this bright green cooked broccoli. It just, I mean, it was amazing. And yes, afterwards I did have cooked eggs as well, off and on, because I would, from then on, basically I would go back and forth from going just defaulting back to being raw, eating mostly fruit, and then having some cooked vegetables and or some eggs. Um, and then a period where even there was some fish involved again, after the first time. And then back to, went back and forth for some years, until 2017, when it was like, I'm just going to do fruit and dairy, and then a year or so ago, no more dairy. So that's how that went.
So tell us where you're at now with food. What do you like to include and not include?
Mm. Um, I love the idea of staying with just fruit, and I'm very interested in I, I'm very interested in this dialogue about whether 100% raw is more important or whether mucusless is most important.
Me
And
too.
I wasn't really exposed to that in my first go around. My first go around, I was in the California Bay Area. There were lots of other raw foodists. We had a lovely group of friends. And the main debate back then, just because of the timing was high fruit Doug Graham style versus Gabriel Cousins' Rainbow Green style, because that book, the Rainbow Green book, had just come out, and there were wars all over the the raw food groups about, oh, if you're eating fruit, you're composting, and and all this kind of stuff. Now, so I knew about Arnold Ehret, but I wasn't really aware of the we did talk amongst ourselves, among my raw food friends in California, about the fact that certain foods, like broccoli, were maybe more digestible cooked. But I don't think we got to the nuance that, for example, um, a butternut squash, which you can eat raw, and some of us made like raw, lasagna, or layer things with thin layers of butternut squash and so on. When you eat it like that, I mean, I stopped. I tried that a few times. I was like, I'm not going to eat that. It's too starchy for me. I just knew that.
Hmm.
If you bake that thing, it's not starchy anymore. If you bake it, the starches have been broken down. And so, and the same with broccoli. I mean, it's not just the fiber. It's a bit starchy, and cauliflower. So I'm really, rather than, because at the moment, it's been 10 months or 11 months since I've gone back to being an avowed raw foodist as opposed to just a default raw foodist that might change tomorrow. Um, the commitment is now about 10 or 11 months. And whereas in 2002, it was like I read that one article and that was it for 10 years. This time I'm not yet there. I'm not yet perfect. I'm not yet 100% raw. So is it better for me to eat the avocado or is it better for me to eat the cooked butternut squash? And this is such an it's I've been really I have beaten myself up sometimes, especially comparing myself to my younger self. But I'm really working not to beat myself up, to say, okay, so how did it make me feel? So sometimes there's the she swallowed a spider to catch the fly thing where you eat one thing and then you chase it with something else to try and make it better, and then you have to chase it with something. And it's and I feel like no. So
I feel you. Yeah, and I'm very interested in this conversation too, because I think a lot of people get very dogmatic about the raw food
yes.
diet, and they
Oh
say
yes.
raw is law and all cooked food is harmful poison, and it causes digestive leukocytosis and blah blah blah. We've heard all the talking points, but I would much rather, like you just alluded to, I would much rather eat steamed broccoli than raw broccoli because it's brighter in color, it's more delicious, it's softer, it doesn't give me a stomach ache, it's not as starchy. So, yeah, and that cooked broccoli could be mucusless, meaning it doesn't call upon the body to produce mucus to try to capture and then expel, toxins. And
Exactly.
that's sort of the main philosophy of the raw vegan diet is that we don't want to eat anything that's toxic. So anything
Hmm.
that's cooked at a super high heat, or if it's starchy, it creates these byproducts that are acidic that our body has to neutralize and expel. So, and I'm very interested in that conversation too, where what cooked foods can we include that have zero negative effect on the body? And there's a writer, he's the one who translated the Essene Gospel of Peace, is the Edmund
Oh,
Bordeaux
Edmund
Kelly.
Zicke, yeah.
Zicke, I don't pronounce
Edmund
his name
Porter
right.
Zicke, yeah.
Zeke. So he writes about three different types of foods you can have: your biogenic, which are full of life force. Think about the honeydew melon, ripe and fresh, and it's full of life force, and it gives you life, and it gives you all sorts of water and good stuff. It's biogenic. It actually is beneficial to the body to consume it. On the other end of the spectrum, you have your biotoxic foods, which cause some type of damage. But then he has this nuance to include food groupings in the middle, which are, he calls biostatic, which don't really have any super positive effect or super negative effect, but they're not going to they're not going to inflict much damage on the body at all. So the biostatic foods, I think of something like steamed broccoli or steamed cauliflower or a steamed sweet potato, where the starches are broken down. It resembles more the consistency and the makeup of a sweet fruit, but it
Yes.
doesn't have the living enzymes and the life force. So yeah, I like that type of nuance. And I'm also just really interested in this conversation of how can we include a more diverse palate, a little bit of cooking, not be super dogmatic. Because I think what people fall into is slipping up, eating something that's cooked, and then like this guilt complex, this cycle of guilt and shame, and these mental hurdles, which I'm sure you've been through in your
Oh yeah,
decades of kind of experimenting with raw food. So I
definitely.
think let's keep discussing this because too the other thing is the wars that you alluded to between the factions of raw food
Hmm.
teachers. It seems so unnecessary. Even though we're all philosophers and we do want to get to the bottom of it, it's like how can we just have a little more grace, acceptance for other people's patterns and decisions, and also our own, and giving ourselves grace to kind of float this way and that way while always heading toward making the best decisions for our bodies.
Absolutely. Grace and forgiveness. Because there was so much name calling. I mean, I remember actually Frederick Paternode, I used to edit his books for him actually and his writing for him. But he was around that time too, he was starting to write things and he was so sensible. And he said the same thing that, steamed broccoli is better than, some combo a bombo, crazy abominable food combination that's going to make you sick. And he raised the point that, even saying cooked, it was kind of a term of abuse, and
Hmm.
in French too, just sort of dismissive, sort of, oh, that's so cooked, it was dehydrated at a too high a temperature, or or it used some spice, some condiment that wasn't really raw. Oh, I'm not going to eat that dish at the pot, like it's cooked, or oh, you're a composting machine because you're eating too much. I mean, it's so much name calling, and it's so unnecessary, and it's just very it's it's strange how sometimes people need to identify themselves in opposition to something else, because even the people who are eating a carnivore diet, we have things in common with them, and
Hmm.
so yeah,
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, pointing out that we do have things in common with the carnivore diet people, which could it's a pretty 180 from what we eat. But what are we trying to do? We're trying to eliminate over processed food. We're trying to
yeah,
eliminate food that doesn't make us feel good, right? And so
that's right.
I
Yeah,
respect, in a way, not even just in a way, I respect the carnivore diet practitioners' dedication to trying something to make them feel better. Just trying to break out of the norm, question the norm, and try something a little more natural based on what they understand. Now, I don't think eating, cow parts every day is natural. It just doesn't. It's impossible to be engaged in that, like we were talking about earlier, from the harvest and production. It's impossible to be engaged in that all the time and feel like that's a natural, fulfilling thing as a human being, because we're just not wired for that.
especially on a commercial level. Yeah, yeah. I mean, if it's more of a symbiosis, I could see it a little more, but it's not on that scale. And
Hmm.
and then you see how we see color and how we smell smells. And I know that a lot of people who grow up in cities and sit in front of computers, their sense of smell is somewhat deadened. I feel blessed because I do also have a very strong sense of taste and sense of smell. Like any kitchen I've worked in, I've um, kind of except that I always use less salt, which may be why my sense of taste is so good. I've often, been asked to identify what's in this or what do we do to it. And wouldn't you know, a really acute palate really appreciates fruit and how it smells, and perhaps is put off by the smell of dead flesh. And someone whose nose is blocked by the city perhaps doesn't smell it quite so much. Although, of course, we know that there are people who find out what they're eating and stop right away as well. So a lot of it is just ignorance. Ignorance
Hmm.
meaning unawareness. Um,
Yeah.
but the mucus thing too. The other thing is processing again, because heat processing is cooking is also a form of processing. And I understand the perspective of people who say, you're basically burning this item. You are applying so much heat to it that if you applied that heat to your body, you would have a burn that, would not be easy to heal. You are changing it, completely denaturing it by the application of heat. And I understand, I mean, I understand that perspective, but the same applies to putting something in a blender, So I wrestle with it a little bit still, while, like you said, trying to give myself the grace. Do you just choose to eat something cooked when you feel like it, or do you have a notional once a week or once a day, or how do you do that yourself?
Yeah, I don't have any rules for myself for eating right now. So if I want cooked food, like last night, I made steamed cauliflower and mushrooms, and ate that with a salad with cucumber, tomato, and avocado. And I put a little hot sauce on that, which has it has vinegar and salt in it, and that's not part of the raw food diet, because I don't subscribe to the raw food diet right now. I'm inspired by it heavily. I
Mm.
love it. It makes the most sense to me, as far as just fresh food from nature. But no, I eat what I want when I want, and sometimes that gets me in trouble. Sometimes I can get
Yeah.
carried away, and I can use food as a, what's the word I'm looking for? Like stimulation.
Yeah. And avoidance probably.
Yeah, and avoiding certain emotions I don't want to deal with, and I think that's a huge common struggle. But no, right now I eat, what I want when I want, and because that allows me to feed my inner child. We've talked about this too, where
Like
we have a
Howard says.
little,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, we have a little rebellious kid in us who wants to eat, pizza or whatever. And sometimes we have to feed that child, or we have to become friends with that child and not just tell them to shut up and go to your room and I'm doing this now. So yeah, I'm open. I eat everything, but I'm like you, where I know what makes me feel good, and I'm also dabbling with things in the periphery because they also make me feel good.
Yeah. 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 I think that's really well balanced because it's easier to present to other people as well then. And we do need each other. We really do. I mean, you mentioned in a message to me the Garden of Eden, and the Garden of Eden, the Gan Eden, in Hebrew for at least in the Hebrew understanding, in the Jewish tradition, it doesn't only refer to the place of innocence, the grace that we fall from, the place that you get kicked out of because you made a primary error. It also refers to paradise. It refers to the place where there's no more burdens and no more suffering, that a sort of a blessed afterlife, what in English we call paradise. And paradise, what does it mean in Greek? It means garden, and it's actually borrowed from Persian. It's a Persian word that was borrowed into Greek, I think, via Hebrew. It means an enclosed garden, a safe walled garden with probably fountains and beautiful fruit trees and birds. In modern Hebrew, it means an orchard, actually. So this place that we think of in so much of Western civilization, the concept of a safe, happy, blessed, innocent, and free from care place is a garden or an orchard. And it's so that's so profound, and it's so much in the center of our hearts in our civilization. Um, and we also know, and all of the mystical branches of these religions know, that paradise is inside each of us. So it's like what I said before about creating our reality, but also recognizing a multiplicity of other realities, and also a certain singular, inexorable reality above all of those. That we can create paradise in the city or in the walled orchard garden, and we can create paradise inside of us. But we also, paradise is never a desert island, is it? It's always with other people. And to somehow, that's my biggest question, is how to marry those perspectives. And I mean, being at peace in myself is a great start, but then to be able to bring what I have and who I am to other people, whether they're carnivores or, my family with their traditional Middle Eastern diet, or, someone else, someone I sing in a choir with or whatever. So, you think about these kinds of things too, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. I love this conversation. I love your perspective. And I love what you were just alluding to, which is giving the people around you love and support, even when we don't agree with, their ethics on one hand or what they put in their mouth, because people do need love and support and connection. We're all in this together. We're all on our own paths in a way, but we're sharing it too. And I love how you're talking about paradise is a garden. Like if we didn't have to make money to buy food, if all of our food was taken care of, it'd be pretty paradisical, right? We would just need to worry about our shelters pretty much. Because like
Hmm.
food, we do so much just to put the food on the table. I mean, that's the phrase for earning a living.
Earn the
And it
daily
is the
bread,
one,
yeah.
yeah, your daily bread. I mean, this is what keeps us alive. So if that was all taken care of, if we actually had gardens big enough in our communities that could feed everybody, we would pretty much instantly be in a place closer to paradise than where we are now.
Yeah.
And I actually do commonly say to people, you can step back into the Garden of Eden. It's right there. It's not a place that we have to build. You just have to step into it, and it's a mindset change because, like you're saying, it does exist in our heart. It's written on the table of our heart. This is all the religious and spiritual teachings seem to teach the individuality, teach that this energy does exist within the person and not
Mhm.
some external thing that we're trying to build or reach or obtain. So, yeah, I'm very much into this. I think the Garden of Eden is a place that we can step into. And, I don't think paradise is far off. If you asked me 20 years ago when I was a teenager, um, what I think about paradise, the Garden of Eden, is it possible? I probably said no because I was too wrapped up into seeing all the destruction and corruption on earth, and it really got me down. I think what we're seeing today with the political back and forth and wars and leadership, a lot of people are suffering and unhappy with the way the world is, and so it seems like such a long reach to say, oh no, the Garden of Eden is obtainable. Paradise is obtainable. People are like, what are you, insane? You're not reading the news? And it's like, well, because I've hung out in orchards and seen how peaceful and perfect it can be. I've forgiven the people I need to forgive and myself, and like I'm cultivating this type of love energy that is paradisical, and it's a choice. It's a choice. We don't have to live in this depressed wasteland, where all the soil is. People say the soil's depleted. They love saying the soil is depleted. Fruit isn't what it was. All the fruit is man-made and hybridized and fake. And it's like that's such a doomer mentality that it's like, no, it's not. You can build your own soil. You literally make your own soil by just throwing out your scraps, composting it. You don't have to use NPK and synthetic fertilizers. So I'm very much into the idea and the reality that we can step right back into the Garden of Eden. So how do we do that? What do we begin to do just to step back in and reclaim paradise for ourselves?
Mm. Well, it's what we've been talking about, isn't it? I mean, I was fascinated in Hawaii because it's a rock in the middle of the Pacific Ocean.
Mm-hmm.
None of the wonderful fruit trees that were growing there were native. They came from South America, or they came from Asia, or the Caribbean. They or maybe one or two from Africa. They did not come from Hawaii. And there were orchards, and there were, even the coconut came on a canoe with the Samoans. Even that's not native to Hawaii. And but they will grow there, and it's one of the wonderful things that humans have done is seen this will grow here, that will grow there. If the climate is a little bit different now than it was 20 years ago, for whatever reason, I'm agnostic on that. But if you observe that one thing doesn't grow so well here anymore, then something else will. Like there are loquats now here in North London that would not. I didn't know the English word for them when I was a child, you know, um, and because they didn't grow here and they weren't sold here. So I think sort of having one's feet on the ground, literally and metaphorically, just being aware of one's surroundings and being willing to work together with people. I used to think this so much that if people pooled resource a bit more, shared composting, it would make compost so much more quickly. A little bit of shared time on some community garden. Um, Community garden as therapy, actually. I mean, um, I went into becoming a raw foodist in 2002 in a fairly low point in my life. Um, and I started volunteering at a community garden, just a few blocks away from where I lived. And I would say that that was the main thing that kind of got me back up. Obviously, eating raw food helped as well, but it because I was interacting with the plants and I was interacting with people, and I got a bit physically stronger and I got a bit emotionally stronger, and it really it kind of it felt like it brought me back to life, and that was a community garden, and it was both the plants and the people, and just showing up, whenever I had some time, I would just show up and do whatever, whatever thing needed doing, and it was so beautiful. Or people had their fruit trees in the Bay Area, beautiful fruit trees. oh, it's a nuisance, right? Because they've got their orange juice cartons in the garbage and they've got this amazing orange tree in the yard. So there was an organization that would gather unwanted fruit and take it to the homeless shelter. And I worked with them for quite a few years and ended up running a chapter of it in, where I lived. So I'd spend my weekends, taking volunteers out to people's gardens. And yeah, it was, and uh, um, this is not a very coherent answer, but it's two examples I can think of ways that you use what you've got and you use people's goodwill and you acknowledge kind of the power of the fruit and produce and gardens to lift people's spirits, and to nourish people, both physically nourish them. And some of those volunteers, they would be so just thrilled and pumped and just happy after spending a morning picking apples or whatever. So no, I think any climate, yeah, any climate, even here where there's less, I think here a lot of people have a private allotment, and I think if there were more community gardens, that would be better.
That's huge. I was a member of a community garden in Massachusetts for 5 years, and it was one of the best things about living there. You meet the people in the community, you're learning too. Because if I have a garden in my yard, my side yard, I'm just doing what I'm doing. I can get inspired on the internet or whatever. But in a community garden, I'm looking over and I'm going, why are her tomatoes twice as big? And then you can ask her,
Yeah, yeah,
oh, I water twice a day. Oh, okay. So you should give them more water. You're learning. It's a place to connect like that, a place to just pick up tips and tricks. But it's also a little bit of a friendly competition. We used to weigh our food and keep it in a log, and then well, it was for the nonprofit organization so they could tell how much food we're producing per year. But it was
mm,
also a bit of a friendly competition: who can put out the most. And
mm,
it was just a beautiful time. The community garden, the way it brings people together, the way it brings children and older folks as well, and can cross the border between age gaps, is it has a high potential for that as well, because kids
definitely.
like picking gooseberries and ground cherries and tomatoes. And I think older folks too have more of the gardening tradition in them because it was just more popular back in the day. But I'm super thankful and excited when I see school community gardens, things growing at school. If your kid goes to school and they're not learning how to grow food, what are they learning? Like, what?
That's
Why
right. Yeah.
not?
Oh, I love those gardens in front of schools. They're such a good thing. And also just being curious. I mean, well, I think even before I was became a raw foodist in 2002, I already had a reputation for, discovering unusual, particularly fruits, but also vegetables. And it was partly, just foraging, literally foraging, discovering, oh, this berry is edible or whatever. But it was also going to the shops and, seeing what was there. And everywhere you go, there's something. Like, I mean, I think you're in Florida, so you have pretty much everything. Um, but I mean, here, um, here I kind of feel quite poorly off. This is not where I want to live long term. I'm here for specific reasons at the moment, and not forever. But here, I mentioned on that Zoom, when I was in the airport, russet apples. It's a specific variety of apple. I never saw that in the States. Um, and fresh dates. You could get them in California a little bit for a few weeks of the year. The Barhi Halals, the very fresh dates. You can get them
Mm-hmm.
here a lot more of the year than even makes sense, and they're amazing. And you can get, like, I think you can get lychees, but I never saw lychees when I lived in the States. You can get lychees all the time here, and we have longuns at the moment, which are even nicer than
Mm.
lychees. And I never saw. I think maybe once or twice in Asian markets in the States I saw longuns, but very seldom. And here they're relatively easy to come by. So anywhere you go, there's something.
That's beautiful. And this is something I really like to focus on and try to teach, is how to source fruits no matter where you are. Because
Yeah,
someone might give the common excuse of, yeah, I live in the north, fruit doesn't grow here, which is wrong, by the way.
it's not true.
Fruit pretty much grows everywhere. Yeah, there are Arctic berries.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. I lived in Alaska for 5 years. I wasn't 100% raw all the time, but I was for some of it, you know.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that, about sourcing food wherever you are. I mean, you're in North London right now. You were talking about Israel. You talked about living in Hawaii, in the Bay Area. Was there a place that was particularly challenging to source fresh fruit?
Well, Alaska was,
Oh, Alaska.
I mean, bizarrely, actually, sometimes Israel isn't great,
Hmm.
bizarrely, because and it's for two reasons. One is that they don't import a lot. So it's highly seasonal and depending on what they will grow. But the other thing is they use so many pesticides there, and it's
Hmm.
kind of a bit much. I mean, so yeah, I have sometimes oddly had a difficult time in Israel, and but Alaska. Well, I lived in a town at the end of the road, at the bottom of a peninsula. So sometimes the produce on the shelf would not really be in what you would consider saleable condition. You know, bags of salad greens that were pretty much green slimy kind of mess. You think, what?
Hmm.
How are you selling that? Or bananas that were really past it or something. Um, Anchorage is the main city, and it was about a 4 or 5 hour drive from where I lived, but it did have a Costco, had two Costcos, and so anytime I went to Anchorage, I would stock up on you could get the big boxes of greens that were in a box, so they'll keep longer. Uh, 10-pound bag of carrots for $5, organic carrots, and actually a good selection of fruit. So I would do a big Costco run. Also, nuts and dried fruit were often good value there. But down the road in town I lived in, they would resell Costco stuff too. And if I knew when their deliveries were, I could get stuff when it was more fresh. So I would do that. Any time of the year that the ground was not frozen, we had a garden. The best cauliflower I've ever eaten, before the slugs crawl on it and ruin it, the best cauliflower I've ever tasted was from the garden, because the soil's gorgeous, gorgeous soil.
Well, and from what I understand too, in Alaska, the in the summer during the growing season, there's a lot more sunlight, so things can grow really large. Did you experience that too?
Not quite so much where we were because it was on the coast, but if you went farther inland, where it's also farther north, so the day is even longer, but it also gets hotter because it's inland. And so it could get up to 80 degrees, even
Hmm.
though it's 40 below all winter in like Fairbanks. And there you would get the cabbage that was 120 pounds or whatever, insane. And because row crops like lettuce and cabbage can basically grow whenever there is light. So if you've got 23 and a half hours of daylight, they will just grow constantly. If you keep they put like a special mat to keep the soil warmer because it's still a little cold at night, and then they will just keep growing. Insane.
Hmm.
But yeah, we had big cauliflower, big broccoli, big beets, um,
Nice.
carrots, radishes. What I also did in Alaska though is I grew microgreens, and I grew them through
Ah,
the winter. So my favorite were sunflower sprouts. When they get to the two leaf, and also pea sprouts. Those are the ones
yes.
I mostly did, but I would do them indoors under a light, not even a fancy light, in the winter, and then I would have fresh greens.
I
Okay.
love that. So we got to pause right here and just let everybody know it is debunked now. If you say fresh fruit doesn't grow or fresh food you can't grow in X or Y or Z place,
Yeah.
that's wrong. Because as long as you have a little power and you can plug in a light, a grow light, you can grow
And
microgreens
this
and
wasn't
sprouts.
even a
And
grow light.
you don't even need a light to grow sprouts. You just need to soak broccoli seeds or soak some little seeds in a jar and let them germinate, let them sprout.
That's
So
right.
that is the easiest fresh food to grow yourself in your kitchen is the sprouts and microgreens. I'm a huge fan of
That's
that.
right. And in the fall, amazing raspberries. Amazing. There were berries that you would not know about. There was something called watermelon berry, and you could also eat the stalk, the young stalk of the plant. So an early spring thing. And then later in the summer, there's the raspberries and the blueberries, which are amazing. The little tiny wild blueberries that you have to go in a bog and be careful you don't fall in to gather
Mm,
them. lingonberries, crowberries, so many just different berries that are not in commerce, but that you can eat them. And a lot of people won't eat something that's not in the store. I've discovered over the years because I'm always saying, "Oh, try this."
Right.
But I did also, to be fair, I did also order cases of bananas and dates. I
Okay.
did get them by the case too. Yeah, and I did get some store-bought orange juice sometimes as well. So that was how that worked.
So this is beautiful reflection as far as how to eat well in Alaska, for example. So you went to Costco, you went to the big box stores, um, and actually Costco's got a lot of good stuff. Like a lot of good organic fruit.
A lot of organic, yeah.
Some of it is fresher if you can, like you said, know when the deliveries are. A lot of times, if you're friends with your produce manager, you can get a lot of great information from them.
That's right.
So you went to Costco, you went to the other stores. You mentioned Asian markets. I don't know how many there are up in Alaska, but
There
since
are
it's
some.
there's a proximity to Asia, I wouldn't be surprised
Yeah.
if there were
Hmm.
some, everywhere. I find them in every city I go to, and they
Yeah,
often have
absolutely.
different distributors and offer different fruits.
We had durian in Alaska sometimes from the Asian market.
Wow. So, all right. So, Costco, big box store, the supermarket, Asian market,
Yeah, and then ordering cases of certain things. Yeah.
direct from farms or from suppliers. And bananas
Yeah.
are and dates are good because they're cheap by weight usually, and they're also some of the most calorie dense foods out there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then you also talk about farming and gardening. Well, going to the farms or foraging and growing your own garden. I think these are three humongous ways to source fruit because it's the freshest. It's the freshest
Yeah.
possible. Picking from the plant directly into your mouth is the freshest thing you can possibly do. So growing it, I know that takes a lot of energy sometimes and more investment than some people want. But a bush or a tree is low maintenance after a while.
Absolutely. Yeah, raspberries, they just do it. Yeah.
Yeah, once it's established, they do their own thing. So it's not as labor intensive as seasonal row crops, like you mentioned, like
Annuals,
vegetables,
yeah.
the
If you can
annuals,
keep the bears and
exactly.
moose out of the raspberries.
Yes, because we're all trying to eat, and that's actually a sign that your food is good. If the bears and the bugs and the animals are eating it, that's actually a good sign.
That's right.
And then, so is there anything we missed? Stores, foraging, growing, meeting the farmers, I think is a huge one. And
Oh
knowing where
yeah.
your farm stands are and your local farms are,
Yes.
meeting those people and having a direct relationship, I think is super important. Do you try to do that wherever you are too?
Absolutely huge. Yeah, huge, huge, big time. Yeah. Very, very lovely friendships with the farmers in especially when I lived in California and was involved in the community garden, but also in Hawaii. Because I knew the farmers, personally, sometimes helped out on their farms anyway. Um, a little bit here, less so. I mean, I don't feel sort of like settled here in the same way, so it's a little bit different. But yeah, um, yeah, definitely, I think it's so important. Have you looked at this is sort of question, have you looked at the communities down in like Ecuador and Costa Rica that speaking about creating the Garden of Eden and so on, have you considered that as well?
Yeah, I looked at the communities in Ecuador for sure. There's Terra Frutis and the Eco Village and Fruitarian Utopia, maybe one or two more. But I was looking into them around a couple of years ago. I applied to one of them. I got in, but then my plans just changed. I ended up going to Costa Rica, and I know there's some communities there. And on that topic, Ronnie Smith, who he runs the UK Fruit
Yeah,
Fest,
yeah.
he just put out a video about the Tanglewood Wellness Center and Lauren Lockman's community project Las Cascadas collapsing and failing because of some, it was like money troubles. It was a big long story, big long drama. But Ronnie just put out this video basically saying like anyone who wants to run away to a community in the tropics is like trying to run away. You're escaping your life. You already live in a community. Why don't you just step up and host gatherings? Why don't you just step up and get involved in your community garden, get involved in dinners together. And he really was deriding and trying to tell us like don't go to these far off places and join a community because you're kind of running away from your issues, and you already live in this place, and like weather isn't the only thing that makes me happy. So I thought that was an interesting perspective. Although I didn't fully agree, I think if we want to build communities, then we should. And if we want to do it in the tropics, far away, with people who eat the same as you, I think you should do that if you're feeling called to. But I agree with Ronnie in the sense that you have community where you are, and you shouldn't just ignore that. And you can actually step up and get involved.
He's not just saying it out of bigotry either. He's actually visited a lot of these places. He's done a huge shift of traveling, and I think he's been to all of those communities. I don't know about Tanglewood, but I know there was a bit of a scandal around Tanglewood recently. But I know Ronnie is saying, be where you are and create community there. And I know I went off to Hawaii thinking I was going to, live happily ever after, growing food and living, being permaculture person on the land, and it didn't quite work out like that. But like I said earlier, I didn't take stock enough, and I didn't recognize this isn't the right place. It might be the right idea, but not in the right place. But
Hmm.
I did wonder your thoughts about it, because I mean, even before I was a raw foodist, I always said, I always growing up, I preferred it in Israel, felt better there, liked it more. I always said I want to live somewhere where you can grow everything, where the fruit grows, and that was kind of that that was kind of a desire. And my flip side, I see a little bit of the content from the people at Fruitarian Utopia, for example, and it does look very idyllic. But then I think I'm a product of the culture as well. I'm a musician, and I'm a linguist, and um, I study philosophical and mystical studies. And if I'm out on a, a fruit forest in the middle of Ecuador where I have no connection genetically or whatever, um, where is the culture there? And I know you're also a musician, so I wonder how you have thought about that kind of question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have the similar thoughts as you, where it sounds idyllic. It sounds like a good idea to be where you can grow your own food with like-minded people, self-sustainable. However, it's a bit isolating, and yeah, I've thought about that too. I would definitely want to bring an instrument, bring my guitar or my saxophone, so that I could at least play music for myself. But it's going to be lonely after a while without a greater community or city or network to not necessarily just perform and make music, but to go hear music and to go take
Exactly.
part in these cultural activities. And if you're starting from scratch with a community of like 10 people, it's like it just seems very isolating. And that's why I choose to live in South Florida. I think it has the best of all these worlds that we're talking about,
I
which
think so,
is
yeah.
you can grow food year round. You can grow pretty much everything and all the best stuff. The weather is quite perfect, except during some days of hurricane season. And it's connected to the cities and major airports. And there's a lot of infrastructure here and a lot of just cultural things going on, not just American culture, but Cuban and
Absolutely. Yeah.
yoga culture and food culture, and there's a little bit of everything here, and it is part of the continental United States. That's why I don't want to go to Hawaii. It's just a little too remote. I can't just drive and see my folks. So
Yeah.
yeah, I've thought about this a lot, and I like being in the world. You know what I mean? Even though I don't agree with a lot of the stuff that goes down and the
Hmm.
way a lot of people live their lives, and a lot of modern society is like toxic, I still enjoy being connected to it in a way because that's where my people are. That's where my friends are. That's where my family is. That's where I am right now. So yeah, it's a balancing game, but I like I like this nuance of like trying to find the Garden of Eden wherever you are, whether that's in Alaska or Israel or anywhere in the United States. I mean, I love how you were talking about how the berries come up every year, and they don't sell them in stores because they can't. They're probably too perishable, too small. You can't box them all
Mhm.
up because they get squished and soft within just a day or two. And that's the beauty of some of these fruits, like loquats. You mentioned those a few times, and it's loquat season right now here in South Florida. They're everywhere, and you will not find them at the store. They're too soft, they're too fragile. You pretty much got to go to the tree and clip them off and then eat them within a few days. And I just one more note on the loquats. I looked up recently the map of where they grow in the United States and in the world, and they grow all over the west coast of California, like all
Yep.
the way north too, which I was surprised about.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you're mentioning too that they're in England, so it seems like they do well
Israel.
in colder places. Israel, the whole Mediterranean's covered with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And they have those big seeds,
Hmm.
the loquats. They have those big seeds, and they're so beautiful and shiny. And often they're even on the point of sprouting if it's a really ripe loquat. And it's like, oh, they're so full of life and vitality with those seeds, you know.
Mm. Yeah, I love it. I love it. So, and I'm constantly amazed by the amount of fruits, the variety and the abundance. If we just had apples and bananas, I would see why a lot of people think raw veganism is insane. But we don't just have apples and bananas. We
We
have
don't.
loquats and longans and limes and lychees and, durian and everything. So,
Ice cream
uh,
bean. You
ice
have them
cream
in
bean, I
Florida,
just
right?
had some. I just
You
had some for
do?
the first time a
Yeah.
couple weeks ago. It's
Oh, they're
incredible.
brilliant. They grow in Hawaii very well, but I've seen them in Israel too. In Israel, I was like, oh, it's an ice cream bean, and I picked it and started eating it and tried to give it to my cousin's kids. Oh no, no, don't give it to them because they didn't know what it was.
Right, right. Yeah, that came from a tree. There were ants. Ants might have peed on it.
Exactly, and I'll go and get the guavas as well, and they won't want to eat. Oh, they might have worms in them. Like, but there's one fruit that I've only seen once in my life, and it was the only time I've been to Florida. And I went to Florida once. I think it was 2008. It was just after the Raw Spirit Festival, which was crazy in Sedona, which I was chefing at. I was in the actual catering team. So anyway, so then I was visiting a friend in Florida just for a few days afterwards, and I ended up driving down the East Coast, and I went to it was called Fruit and Spice Park, I think.
Hmm.
Is that still there?
It is.
And it was a Vietnamese fruit on a vine. It was called gac, and it was amazing. Like I got a taste of it. It's like a gourd, but it's a sweet fruit. And I snuck out a couple of the seeds, but then I didn't. I wanted to get them going in Hawaii, but it didn't work out. But gac, that's the only time before or since that I've seen that fruit, and it fascinated me. So you do know it?
Yeah, that's a really unique fruit. It's orange. It's
Yes,
spiky. It's
yes, delicious.
but the Fruit and Spice Park, which you mentioned, I'm a member of it, and it's such a beautiful place to go. 37 acres, owned by the county, but just fruit trees everywhere. And last time I went, I tried a few new fruits. I had never had miracle berry before. Have you had
Oh
that one?
yeah, uh-huh. Yeah,
Yeah, miracle berry. For anyone who's listening who doesn't know what that is, it's a tiny little orange,
teeny teeny.
reddish fruit the size of a goji berry, kind of, and it messes with your taste buds. It
Yeah,
it has the ability to make your sense receptors to sour change so that when you eat sour food, it tastes sweet and doesn't taste sour anymore.
yeah.
And it was such a weird experience. I ate a miracle berry and then had some rose apple, and it was like the sweetest thing ever. It was super good. But yeah, Fruit and Spice Park's got a lot of unique fruits down there. Um, a really interesting place. I kind of have a problem with this. Maybe I shouldn't say it publicly, but I don't like how they don't use permaculture techniques to grow their food there.
I saw that. Yeah, I was a bit surprised. I kind of assumed surely they would. And yeah,
And it just makes the bananas not that good. Like none of the bananas are producing well. They're all skinny because they're not fertilized properly. They're not using biomass and compost to build up these trees. I think a lot of it is just landscaped.
yes,
So I
it
like
seemed
I like
very
that place. I like
bare. Yeah,
It's very bare. I like that place. I like walking around, but they could actually produce a lot higher quality fruit if they use some more permaculture techniques, I think.
yeah.
Um, but I love talking about the unique fruits that people have never heard of. And there's some that are super unique to people, but they're like normal to everyone else. For example, you mentioned like longans and lychees. Those you can find at Asian stores, and they're very common in Asia and here in South Florida during the season. But a lot of people have never
Yeah.
experienced them. Do you have any tips for people to branch out and try new things?
It sort of often surprises me how tentative people are with fruit. And, because I've been introducing fruits to people basically my whole life, like I said, it just seems to be something I came in with. And it probably makes me a difficult person to ask because I'm the one who's offering the fruit. Um, like, how do you, if you're not that open to trying fruit, what what would make I mean, because like even my dad, he wouldn't try a cherry, and I was like, what's wrong?
Maybe we need to encourage people just to be more open and to actually
Yeah,
try things, and not have any attachment to an outcome and just try it and see how it
I
feels.
think that's what it is. I think that's really what it is. It's the lack of attachment to an outcome because, in a bag of gummy bears with a lurid variety of colors, and they're all the same shape, and they're all going to taste kind of a different artificial color, but basically the same. But no two zucchinis taste the same. And
Mm,
so, someone wants that, they have pasta bolognese, and that's the name. I used to say people would be attached to the name of a dish. So if a dish had a name, and this is pasta bolognese, and then it's made with, zucchini noodles and whatever, sun-dried tomatoes or something, then they won't even taste it. They'll just taste the difference from what they're expecting to taste. So
right.
if I made raw dishes, I would try not to name them, and I would try not to say
Mm,
this is imitating pasta or whatever, at all. And I think the same with fruit because maybe you've had a disappointing orange. A disappointing orange is really disappointing,
hmm
whereas an orange gummy bear is an orange gummy bear. So yeah, so to be unattached to the outcome, I think the other thing for me, I'm willing to cut around the bad parts.
hmm
If something's got a bad patch in it, maybe the rest of it is even sweeter because it started to go bad because it was so ripe. Sometimes it's just bad, especially things like mangoes. Sometimes they're just bad, and you can tell from the hue of the skin. There's not going to be a bite in there that's good. But sometimes there's a few black spots. You cut them out, the rest of it's gorgeous.
You're
And
totally
I
right, and
know,
I
yeah,
want to stop and
lots of
highlight
people
that.
aren't willing.
Well, I want to highlight that because you're right. Some fruits, when they have mold on them, are actually sweeter than when they don't, like papayas, for example. If there's
Yes.
a little bit of mold on the outside of a papaya, I kind of see that as a good sign. I'm like, oh, this has been ripening so much that it's just hit that point of like perfect ripeness, and the Mao is maybe going past it, but other parts of the papaya are going to be perfect. So
Absolutely.
maybe that's a tip too: is don't let the mold scare you, don't let the blemishes scare you. You know what I just discovered yesterday, and I want to share this with you. I'm going to make it public soon. Is I had black sapotes,
Mm,
which are in season right now in South Florida. Really, really good. It's the chocolate pudding fruit or the black persimmon.
actually,
And
a
I
persimmon,
noticed
yeah.
I
Yeah.
took one out of the box that they were all sitting in, and it had a bruise. It had an impact from another fruit. So another fruit hit
Mm,
it, and there was a big black indentation on this sapote.
yeah.
When it was finally ready to eat, I opened it up, and the part behind the impact bruising was the sweetest, most delicious,
Yes.
mind
Yes.
blowing bite of black sapote I ever had in my life. It took it to another dimension flavor wise. It was sweeter, and the consistency was more like a persimmon. So it was actually more jelly and kind of
Mm.
like watery. So I said, let me test this hypothesis. I took another black sapote that was not fully ready, but it was a little soft, and I hit it with a spoon a few times. I just beat the thing up. I bruised it and I stuck it back on the counter. The next day I ate it, and I was correct that it made it
It,
sweeter. There's
it
certain things when
will.
we, yeah,
It'll
certain
bring the
impacts
sugars
and
out.
bruisings.
Yeah.
It brings the sugars out. It tore the cell walls. I don't know exactly what
Hmm.
happened, but it initiated a deeper ripening process that I was like,
Yeah.
oh my God, this is so good. Guys, don't be afraid of the blemishes. I think that's just the key takeaway
Oh,
right
they're
here.
often attractive. It's things like apples, if it has a blemish on it, a little bit of that scabbing or stuff, it's often that's going to be the most delicious one. And yeah, speaking of bruising, I lived in my first years as a raw foodist. The house that I lived in North Oakland, just south of Berkeley, there were two apple trees, lemon trees, an orange tree, pineapple, guava, a fig tree. The landlord was really cool. He lived in the house too, and not many other people in the house were particularly interested. So I kind of got as much of the fruit as I wanted. But he had paving in the yard, and I discovered that if an apple fell from the tree and hit the pavement, if I picked it up and immediately located where it had hit and just sucked the juice out, it was the most delicious apple juice you've ever had. Just so delicious. But if you left it for even, 15 minutes, then it would be brown and nasty. And it was sort of, it sometimes felt overwhelming, all these falling apples and wonderful juice.
Yeah, and you're also sort of alluding to the timing that we need to exercise with these fruits, like a few minutes or hours or days too late, and you're going to deal with fermented bad flavors. But timing is really important. I think developing a good sense of timing is really
Yeah.
important for fruit eaters because you bring things home, and sometimes they got to wait on the counter for weeks at a time. Persimmons,
Yeah.
especially, they take a
Melons. Yeah.
long
Persimmons can be
time.
months. Yeah.
Yeah, and not jumping the gun because I'm sure we've all opened up a persimmon too early or an avocado too early, been extremely let down, and then the whole thing's kind of ruined because you've interrupted that ripening process. So timing, I think, is really important.
And let them be ripe. I mean, in the Middle East, they eat things like peaches and nectarines when they're as hard as an apple, and it's horrible. And but they eat it like that. And I would sometimes, when I'm there, I would sometimes have, if I wasn't in my own place, I'd have to hide some so that they could actually get ripe. And they keep them in the fridge as well because of flies. But so to hide some peaches and nectarines, because when they are ripe, they're just so heavenly. And when they're hard, it's hard on you. And there's this myth that fruit is too perishable, and some fruit is perishable. Strawberries aren't going to sit around, but apples, you can leave an apple. I mean, most of them you can leave them for months, and they just get sweeter.
Yeah,
So
especially in cold storage. I think the
yeah,
root cellar is a really important tool for people who live in the north. And when you harvest your fruits and vegetables in the fall, then you can store them in the root cellar, and your potatoes, your beets, your apples,
hard
they're going
squash.
to stay for
Yeah.
months and months, especially if those beets and potatoes have the dirt still on them.
Yes,
So, and yeah, so you're totally right. Fruit is not as perishable as a lot of people think.
it really isn't.
And then when you have things like a fridge, I mean, I don't have a root cellar, but I have a fridge, and so my oranges will last, many weeks inside the fridge. Um, there's a
Yeah.
huge, loud sound happening right now outside. I don't know what that is. Fruits are meant to last a while with their packaging on them. Um, Even the
Yeah.
climacteric fruits like bananas, they're meant to be picked a little early. You can throw green bananas in your backpack. They're not going to get bruised and bumped around because they're so dense. But as the time goes on, they turn yellow, and
Yeah.
even once they're yellow, you have days before you can choose to eat them because there's this period of like sweetness as it develops and as the starches break down. It's a beautiful thing, and I think we just need to be fluent. We just need to be consistently trying and consistently enjoying and putting ourselves out there. Hey, I'm going to take a risk at the grocery store today. I've never had this fruit. I don't know if it's ripe
Yeah.
or if it's going to taste good, but I'm going to buy it because it's worth it to me to invest in this potential new source of fuel for me.
And it's a lovely learning experience, actually, getting your sense honed in on how to pick out a melon or, listening to the sound. You tap the watermelon and you're listening for just the right note. And that's going to be a delicious one. And, for sure. But I mean, I remember, learning fruits, yeah, like you said, I've never tried this before, but I'm going to extrapolate from other fruits that I know, and I'll see what I learn with this. Or like you were saying, you were talking with Eli about plantains, and When I listened to your conversation with him, it reminded me vividly. One summer I was in Germany doing a language course, and actually I lived mostly on watermelons, but I had if I had to go out in the evening, I would eat plantains. I had a lot of plantains in Frankfurt in Germany. I did manage to find some durian as well, but it was a lot of watermelon, bananas, and then plantains if I really was going to be out all day, needed to sustain myself. And it was just, I think I then visited with my parents afterwards. Between my parents and people on the language course I was on, the number of people who were just astonished about me eating these plantains and not knowing, especially with the black skin, and not knowing that you could eat this thing raw. And I'm like, well, it's just another variety of banana, it's just a
Hmm.
banana, really. But being away from home in a strange place, immersed in a strange language, and those plantains were so grounding for me. They were so sustaining and comforting, and yet to other people around me, they were so
No,
strange.
that's a good point. If we're not taught how to eat these fruits or pick them out, then it's going to be strange to us. There are no television commercials for plantains. There just aren't. And so I think a big problem is that people want to outsource their decision making. Maybe not consciously want to, but we're trained to do that, right? We're trained to listen to the advertisements and basically just pick out what's on the shelf at the store that they give us. It's been curated for you already. So it takes a lot of personal responsibility to eat fruit because now we have to actually decide how we're going to fuel ourselves, what breakfast is going to be. They're not promoting mono meals in the mainstream media. They're not pushing this on TV at school.
No,
You know, if they serve fruit at school, it's a piece, it's a couple grapes, next to the chicken nuggets or something. So it takes personal responsibility. That's why it's not for everyone. And that's why the raw vegans are the weird ones eating plantains while everyone else is
yeah.
eating, German sausages or whatnot. So it takes responsibility.
But it's even to the level of what's in the store, and it's kind of catch-22. I mean, the exception to this is in Berkeley. They have two premises now, but when I was there, just one called Berkeley Bowl because it used to be a bowling place. It's an amazing market, and it's a supermarket, but it has the biggest produce section you've ever seen with the biggest variety. I mean, that's where I learned name sapote. That's where I learned white sapote. That's the first place I encountered a durian. That's a fresh one.
Mm.
That's the first place I saw a mangosteen before I went to Thailand. Snake fruit. I mean, just you name it. Kiwano melon, star fruit. No, I know they have them in Israel. Anyway, just an incredible selection of exotic fruits, and six different varieties of pineapple and 10 varieties of grapes, and just, I mean, on steroids produce section, amazing. And for me, yeah, I would go and I would, try a new fruit or vegetable every however. And
Mm.
I really loved white sapote, and then which you could get there. And I discovered that
Hmm.
they grow in Santa Cruz, not for, what, like less than 100 miles south of Berkeley. So I said to someone, well, why aren't they in all the stores? Why can't I go to Safeway and get a white sapote? Because they're kind of bruisable, they're not easy to transport because you can't pick them that unripe. You can actually, you can. To me, they're no more bruisable than a pear. Oh, they're perishable, but the main reason people don't know what they are, so people won't buy them. They're an incredible fruit. They're so delicious. And they grew right there. You could have locally grown white sapote. And oh, but people don't know what they are, so we're not going to buy them. But then how are people going to know what they are? It's catch-22. And it's so frustrating.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think that's why we just need to get loud and get out there and talk about this and put it in people's faces because the mainstream sources of information in our societies are not putting out this information. And you're totally right about the sapotes. They're just unassuming, green spheres that don't really look like anything. But once you bite into a ripe one, I mean, it's a total game changer. It tastes better than any ice cream in any of those frozen aisles. And they designed those ice creams to be addicting, you know?
Addictive, yeah.
Um, so yeah, the sapotes, you mentioned snake fruit, the kiwano melon, just so many options out there for us. people. And if you're just eating the same foods, the same small selection, there's more out there for us. And this is what's going to help us appreciate and find longevity in a natural food diet. Because I'm not here preaching that we should all go raw vegan or anything. I think that we should all be aware of where our food comes from and try to get the best stuff possible around us, which is more possible than we think. I think there's a lot of amazing fresh food out there. We talked a lot about the trees, and I think that is another huge thing, is like, don't just go to the stores. Find out where the trees are. Even in the North, even in anywhere. I'm familiar with America, with the United States, so I'm going to talk about that. When I lived in New Orleans, every apartment I lived in there had a fruit tree in the yard. The first place I went to had loquats in their yard. And I didn't even know what they were, but they were amazing. Another place I lived in had figs, mulberries, and blackberries. And then another place I had plantains. And New Orleans is not a place where people think about food growing on trees. We think about the po' boys and the jambalaya and the gumbo and the alcohol. But it just goes to show it's everywhere, folks. And in the North, I mean, I grew up in Massachusetts. There are apple orchards galore. There are mulberry trees. There's pawpaw thickets in some of these parks out there. So
Wow.
we gotta open our eyes. We gotta sharpen our radar and kind of like calibrate our radar to more possibilities. It's not just
Absolutely.
Uber Eats anymore. It's the trees on the side of the road. It's your garden in your backyard.
And I will say, if it's not, if if you are open to vegetables as well as fruit, and like I said, I would ideally I'd like to move towards just fruit, but if you look in the understory, I was very unsatisfied as a raw vegan that, most of the vegetables are basically the same species. They're not only the same genus, they're cultivars of the same species, Brassica oleracea. And, that's kohlrabi, that's broccoli, cauliflower, arugula, cabbage, on. I could keep going. And they're the same plant. And that troubled me. And as I said, I love foraging for wild greens. And this is the biggest duh I've had in my life. So when I was a teenager, in the UK in the summer, there are amazing blackberries. And we would have a joke, my friends and me, that the best blackberries always had nettles under them, stinging nettles. So you
Mm,
were going to get caught by the brambles of the blackberries and you were going to get stung by the stinging nettles. So about 10 years later, I discovered nettles. And I went, the biggest duh ever, that I should have been gathering some nettles when I've been gathering the blackberries. Because nettles, apart from being super, 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 super on steroids nutritious, are delicious. They're so scrumptiously delicious. I thought they were the most delicious green I'd ever tasted. And I did have them raw. I ate them, I put them in smoothies raw. I did mostly cook them, but I dehydrated them and then I would put them in salads dry. Um, and they're incredible, and they grow in absolute luxuriant abundance in the springtime in many places, even in Arizona, even in parts of Arizona.
they do. And I'll even recount my experiences in Massachusetts on a farm. There were wild nettles growing the entire border of that farm, and they are delicious. How did you process them to eat them raw? Did you kind of like have to rinse off the stingers?
Like I said, it was either that I put them in the blender, so then they were
Mm,
blended, or I dried them just at room temperature dried, just spread them out.
okay.
We had the whole tarp spread out with nettles and let them dry, and then just garbled them up, took them off the stems. And maybe I'd get one or two stings doing that, but I never got a sting eating them dry in a salad. There would be probably a dressing on the salad, which would also lubricate it.
Yeah. Well, and these are foods that just pop up. I mean, most of the nettles out there, I'd imagine people didn't plant, that
That's
they're
right.
wild.
Yeah, yeah.
And same with blackberries in a lot of places. I'm just going to go back to New Orleans in the lower Ninth Ward, which was the neighborhood that flooded the worst during Hurricane Katrina back in 2005. But I lived in that neighborhood, and there were more blackberry thickets in the lower Ninth Ward. It's a residential, neighborhood. It's all houses. More blackberries than you could imagine. Some of the lots were abandoned since 2005, have been abandoned for 20 years.
Wow.
because it got ruined in the flood. And the entire lot is now blackberries for some of the properties. Um, and so it's amazing how they self propagate. No one's attending to them, and it's sort of turning into a Garden of Eden. These neighborhoods are just becoming more populated with fruits, blackberries, mulberries, because as the birds grab them and take them, they'll poop out the seeds and they'll plant more. So I just love how nature lends itself to us eating these types of foods. They make it so that nettles and blackberries are friends and can grow next to each other. Tomatoes and basil, whatever it may be, there's these companions in nature. And the fresh food is always going to be there to serve us. I think we just have to be responsible with it, and keep cultivating things properly, keep taking care of the land, and keep focusing on these fresh fruits, because that is the food for humanity. Um, Ela, is there anything else you want to add just to the conversation around fresh fruit and how to center it in our lives? And maybe not just fresh fruit, but any fresh, natural food.
Well, what you just said summed it up perfectly. I thought that was so beautiful. I mean, it's there for us, and it invites us to take care of it. On the one hand, I'm back here visiting my parents in the summer and I eat some tomatoes in the garden, and 6 months later my parents say, "Oh, there's 6 little tomatoes in the garden." And on the other hand, so it just happened. I wasn't intentionally planting tomatoes. On the other hand, that kind of thing happens, and you think, I want to build compost. I want to plant a tree. I want to look after the soil so that it will be fertile ground for more tomatoes. Um, and I think that feeling of symbiosis, that maybe this question I keep coming back to of I'm creating my own reality, but I have to be in interconnection with my fellow humans and my fellow environment. But there is also an inexorable reality above this multiplicity of perspectives. I think that symbiosis and that taking care, that's where it's at, isn't it? That's kind of what you were saying too.
Yes, that is where it's at, because we're serving the plants, they're serving us, and it's beautiful. And hopefully they'll sustain us forever. Ela, I'm curious, because you said you're a musician and you went to music school. Just to change the subject a little bit before we wrap up, um, how do you keep music in your life? Tell me about that a little bit.
At the moment, I'm singing in a choir, and it's a very good choir here in London. Like it's sort of it functions as a professional organization, although we're not all of us professional singers. So that's my main way at the moment. I was an oboe and English horn player, and I mean, kind of to the semi-pro, possibly going to become pro level. And it sort of it's not in my life essentially at the moment, but may come back at some point. Just recently, I've been immersing myself a bit in Arabic music, which I've always been a little bit obsessed with, and learning how to sing that a little bit, which is a whole different. It's a different musical structure, different scales, different idioms. So that I'm just enjoying also. But yeah, the voice. And you play guitar and sax, and uh,
Yep, saxophone was my primary instrument. It has been for 30 years, I guess now. Um, I picked up guitar shortly after. I play a lot of guitar, a lot of bass. I like to play
guitar is
drums.
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, but I also love singing, and I think choir is really important for humanity, as well as like the community gardens and different community groups we talked about. The process of harmonizing vocally with other people in a room, maybe a really opulent, reverberant room, there's nothing like that. And I joined my first choir in grad school, so I was like
Oh,
30.
really?
Yeah, or around that age. And I had always done jazz band and different bands and stuff like that, but I had never been in a choir. And that one semester being in a choir ramped up my musicality tenfold. My ear
Really.
developed. I actually developed like almost perfect pitch. I mean, way better relative pitch because I could hear everything. I was connected. I was singing the baritone or the bass roll. So I was connected to the root of the music and feeling the chords and feeling it all in my body. Not to mention everyone else's voices reverberating and connecting and unifying. I love choir.
I love I mean I enjoy the big choir that I sing in regularly. That I mean it is we do amazing repertoire, and I mean across the board from, the the famous, Verdi Requiem, and the classical choir, classics Bach Mass and B minor, but we did a piece by Duke Ellington as well, and so we do that kind of end of things too. But I enjoy probably even more when I sing in a small group, like sometimes just one to a part. Like at the local church, I sometimes go if they have an important service. I will sometimes go and sing, and we do it on just maybe one rehearsal, one to a part, go. And the way that it elevates the service for the people who are there, and the way that we have to click, and we may not have sung together before. There's something just so dynamic and enlivening about it too.
Yeah. And I mean, we could talk all day about music and food, but I find a lot of similarities between the two things. Music, there's a cultural aspect to it, where the music from this country is going to feel different. It might be hotter than the music from this culture. The fact that you prepare it, with love and mindfulness, and then you get to share it with people. The fact that it's there viscerally for the time that you're enjoying it, but once it's gone, it's gone. Once you eat the food, it's gone. Once you hear the song, it's over. There's so many commonalities between music and food.
There really are. And that's why I wonder about the community off in Ecuador thing, because it, I mean, some of the people there say things like, well, you have to leave the dominant culture and go and, commit everything to your fruitarian lifestyle. And I think, but in a way, my fruitarian lifestyle and my musicianship or my music making, they're not separate. And not only because they're both in me, that and I don't. I'm sure there are guitars at those places, at those fruit farms, but yeah, I don't yet see how it's integrated with the wider culture. And you're so right. I mean, even food eating is so part of culture. I mean, back to Levi Strauss and as the philosopher, and before, this sort of dichotomy of raw cooked, and I think the ancient Greeks had it too, as well, for cultured versus savage. Um, it's deep within us. So.
Absolutely. Well, Ela, thank you so much for this conversation today. I think we touched on a lot of interesting and core points to enjoying food and enjoying life as a human being. So I really value your time. Thank you so much for joining me. And is there anything else you want to add to our listeners, to the Radical Health Show, about anything that we talked about or hadn't yet?
Hmm. Just thank you so much for listening, and I hope that this conversation offered the invitation to people to explore what the colors around them are inviting them to, and to explore what the Eden inside of their heart is.
I love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll talk soon.
Yes.
If you are inspired to eat more natural food, more fresh food, more raw, living, delicious, hydrating, colorful, nourishing food, but you don't really know where to start, or are having trouble sort of expanding your options and expanding the amount of food that you can enjoy, I recommend going over to thefruitcompanion.com and consider picking up a paperback or PDF version of The Fruit Companion. This is effectively the cheat codes to the best food on the planet. It'll teach you how to source, identify, and pick out at peak ripeness the 100 most common fruits in the world, and how to differentiate them by their classification, whether they're an acid fruit, a sweet fruit, subacid, fatty fruit, a fruit to be cooked, or a non-sweet fruit, or melons. You'll learn food combining techniques. You'll learn best practices for eating and enjoying the world's best foods. Check it out, The Fruit Companion. Follow The Fruit Companion on Instagram and follow Radical Health Zine on Instagram. Subscribe to YouTube at the School of Unlearning or School of Unlearning 11. And stay tuned for the next one. I got some great podcasts coming up this season. So stay tuned, stay in touch. Much love, y'all.